Right, so welcome everyone to our weekly call. The sort of topics for this week, which I thought we would cover, are in this order. We're going to talk a little bit about DOE being enabled in Android, and in anticipation of me being able to successfully attract one of the Android team onto a future call, which is still to be confirmed, but I'm ever the optimist. I thought it would just be worth spending a few minutes talking about that and seeing what questions people might have for Google should one of the Android team be able to join us. Well, and that's obviously a topic we can continue via email post call, but I just wanted to get people starting to think about that, and the sorts of questions that you'd like to see addressed should one of the Android team come on. We're also, as it's now not so many weeks away, going to spend a few minutes talking about IETF 12. And some other IETF related matters as well, which I'll come back to. And since Dave's name has rather fortuitously popped up on my screen as I was even saying that, I was going to see if either Dave or Glenn were on the call, whether they had anything they wanted to share with us about sort of thoughts for the agenda for the ADD working group, amongst other things. Well, we come back to that, and then really I'll be driven by the rest of you as to any other topics that are on your minds that you might wish to raise. But let's start with Android though, and the news that there's an expectation that Android 13 Tiramisu will support DOE when it ships at some point in 2022, and see whether that, if we can get one of the Android team onto the call, what sort of questions are on your minds that you would very much like to pose to Google. If we can get one of the two to field them.
Oh, Jesus Christ, that's
so does anyone have any questions that you think would be particularly useful, or even not necessarily properly thought out questions, but even just topic areas that you would like to see addressed in a conversation about the support for DOE within Android?
I mean, key is the auto configuration, right? How do you, and the dot currently is a in-place IP address upgrade. I don't think that this will be the case for DOE. Or maybe it is.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah, that would seem like a reasonable question, Ralph.
I need to go and review what's out there already, but I would be curious to hear about just the basic stuff from the other rollouts of DOE. So how do you prevent it automatically upgrading? How is it going to be configured exactly? Is it going to require a full URL or just the domain for the DOE server? Because everyone seems to be slightly different. You need the /DNS query on the end. The question that came up on the mailing list recently is, will it be proper DOE, like a binary, the DNS question, or is it going to be as you know, the kind of fake DOE that was talked about?
Yeah.
Will there be a canary domain to prevent it working, or is it going to look for group policies, or is it going to what kind of prevention mechanism? And is it going to support DDR?
Or discovery mechanisms generally, I guess.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Also, what levels is it going to be configurable at? So is it just per app or per on the system level? And will apps be able to override it? All the technical details.
Yeah, those are all good questions, Peter. Yeah, I can see some points also in sort of mirroring that in the chat as well, which I'll pick up and
Play DOE.
Yes, Play-Doh. There's a reference for the teenagers in there, and yeah, optional for, as Kurt has put in, optional for apps to use Doe, or mandatory as a full service for Doe into apps.
I'm not quite sure I understand Kurt's question. I think it goes, we're interested in the other way. Meaning, is Doe in the operating system going to cause Doe not to be available in apps? I think would be a better way to ask that question. Kurt, am I misunderstanding your question?
I don't know if Kurt's able to unmute and
Okay.
Come on.
I mean, that is actually an interesting question. Is it possible for the operating system to prevent Doe? And I think the answer is no, but it's worth asking.
Yeah, so Kurt's added to the chat, the relationship between operating system apps would be helpful. Does anyone else have any sort of general sort of question areas you think would be beneficial to cover off? I've got some sort of reasonable categories there.
Okay, sorry for all the questions, but have they done any beta testing, and what's the expected rollout or the expected adoption?
Yeah.
Are there any published stats or stats that they could publish that would be available?
Yeah. Yeah, because at the moment, all I've seen is something which is very high level. So, and just a reference to 2022, for example, which isn't especially precise. So clearly, it'd be useful to get a bit more detail behind that, if possible. But there's a chance to give some thought. Oh yeah, performance data. Yeah, that's a good point, Kurt. Yeah, any benchmarking type info would clearly be helpful, whether it fails open or closed, which I guess will be of interest to many in terms of how things might work. Whether it be default on would be kind of interesting, I guess, for network operators in particular.
Actually, one other question is, I don't know if it's already available, but is DOT available in Android?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Okay, thanks. Probably should know that.
It's been in there for quite a long time, actually, a couple of years, every year or so at least.
That does lead to another question of which one might be preferred if both are available.
Yeah.
I guess even from these few minutes, it is reinforcing the view that actually a conversation or presentation stroke conversation like this would be quite useful in that case, because there's quite a lot of ground that we've covered even in 10 minutes on that.
Well, one last thing, if I assume that they've spoken to some people who are going to be, who support Doe, what was the industry reach engagement for this beforehand? Or the responses they got?
I think you're in it right now.
That can be scary. This is it. We are the focus group.
Right.
Yeah, but it would be interesting to know, has there been any sort of general stakeholder engagement, or is it simply something which is viewed as a natural evolution, given as we've already discussed that for some time there has been support for DOT. So I guess it's not unreasonable to look at Doe. And actually, Roy is clearly reading my mind. I was just about to say, and whether there are plans to move beyond dot and do, for example, with doc support, which wouldn't be a huge surprise, I guess, for Google to think about support for doc as well, or instead, for that matter. It was quite spooky that was appeared on the chat literally as I was thinking it there, Roy. That's quite impressive. Supplementary question then, just to try and sort of lean on anyone with contacts in Google. I have through Eric and Kenji sort of reached out to the Android team, but so far without any success or indeed response. I don't know if anyone on this call has got any good contacts within the Android team, particularly that you would be able to leverage to encourage their participation. Anyone claim to be best friends with the Android team? Good point, John, in the chat. Yeah, I haven't reached out to Ben Schwartz, to be fair. So, yeah, I could certainly try him as well. Well, if anyone's got any other ideas on sort of reaching out to Google Beyond, I'll absolutely follow up with Ben offline anyway. But if anyone's got any other thoughts, then please just drop me a line as they occur to you, because I think an early discussion on this would be quite beneficial all round. Okay, let's move on to IETF 112. Couple of easy admin things first. First one is you would have seen from the sort of various of the mailing lists and indeed from the NomCom group that there are a range of vacancies coming up within the IETF organization, with area directors, IAB nominations, the LLC, and indeed the IETF trust. And in fact, I think that's the right. If I've put the link in the chat, if I can get the right link. The reason I mention it is there's a deadline coming up, which I think is tonight. I presume it's midnight tonight, or 23:59 probably UTC, to nominate either yourself or anyone else that you think could be usefully fill any of those vacancies. I've put a link in the chat which takes you to the nomination screen. All the details are on there, so feel free to act on that whilst time allows. And I think it's this time next week for any nominees to fill out the relevant questions in the questionnaire and to respond back to the NomCom committee. Someone's raised their hand. I think that might be Glenn masquerading as an iPad, but I could be wrong.
It is me.
Yeah,
so this is the beauty of, we had to recently do an update to our iPad software for work, and it required a factory reset. So I'm now in stealth mode for a bit. Let me give a couple nudges. So I served on last year's NomCom, and it was a really rewarding experience. You got to see how the sausage is made. You got to occasionally provide some input to that sausage making, and it was really wonderful. So when it comes time for volunteering for NomCom, please do. For the posts, I'm the chair of the IETF trust. We have one of the positions open. And let me say, you don't have to be a lawyer to be on the IETF trust, but we do tangle with a lot of legal issues. So if you like to dabble and you like to learn a lot about IP, which is copyrights, software licensing, and trademarks, but not patents, because we don't deal with patents at the IETF Trust. Feel free to throw your name in the hat. A good pool of candidates produces the best results.
Oh, I didn't know you were involved on the trust, so that's timely. Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah, I'm your friendly IETF chair trust. Or trust chair, sorry, other way around. It's early here.
And since I can see Chris is on, who's on the NomCom this year, so has the I presume it's the NomCom group that sort through all the nominees. It amused me when I saw that the questionnaire responses have to be in was it, I think, plain text, 77 character width, something like that. Yeah, plain text or Unicode, wrapped to 77 columns. At some point, perhaps the NomCom committee might want to consider other data formats, possibly, who knows, which might make it even easier for people to respond.
Are you suggesting that this process is not fully up to date?
I suppose these newfangled PDFs and doc formats, heaven forbid they'd ever catch on.
I will loosely accept that perhaps like HTML or something, but PDF, I mean, now you've really gone a bridge too far. I will fight you to the nail on that.
I will point out the tools committee is also, I guess, probably always looking for people to volunteer to write code to fix that current limitation.
Yeah, I suppose at least it's gone beyond the need for just a sort of quill pen and vellum to submit your nomination. But,
hey, at least you don't have to put a mark. What was it, column 5 or was it column 6 to indicate a continuation on the next line? So.
But anyway, seriously,
5 or 6, I'm old.
There are, I think, a variety of openings in the IETF hierarchy, and I think there were various admonishments for people to volunteer on the mailing lists sort of this week. So I'm sure there are plenty of people on here that could easily do that, or could do that well. Whether they could easily do that, I'll leave as a matter for them to.
You better act quickly because nominations close tonight.
Yeah, is it 23:15? Yes, it is 23:15.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, yeah, it's this time next week to complete the questionnaires for any nominees that accept their nomination. Okay, so that was something to mention. Second thing on IETF 112 was the draft agenda was published, I think, on Friday. So that might be something that people would want to have a look at. But remember, it is only the draft and therefore subject to change. I think it finalizes in a couple of weeks' time. And it's on a European time zone this time, so it runs from roughly midday through to 6 o'clock or something like that on CET this time round. So a bit less challenging for those of us in Europe than the last one. And presumably slightly more challenging for people, for example, on West Coast US this time around. But sleep's for wimps, as somebody once said. And then specifically, as both Glenn and Dave are on, I don't know if there is anything you wanted to say about your thoughts on the agenda for the ADD working group.
I mean, one thing I can say is we haven't set the agenda yet. It's still a work in progress. We've had, since we met last, we've had a couple of updates. We've had some new adoptions, and I believe there's going to be at least one more call for working group adoption to come out probably this week. So we have a bunch of very active activity going on. Stay tuned on the list once Dave and I have had a chance to sync up.
I'll also say that overall the working group has been making good progress on getting focused on the things that we can come to agreement on. So if you haven't been paying attention, you should be aware that this is not a just another one of those stalled groups that languishes for long times. We're actually making progress. So there's still plenty of opportunity to be involved.
And of course, excitingly now, we've got product shipping supporting DDR.
Draft DDR.
Draft DDR. Wash my mouth out. Yeah.
It'll be ossified any day now. So,
but to that point, both DDR and DNR are pretty long in the tooth at this point. So this would be, if you haven't been paying close attention, like Tail said, this would be a really good time to give both those drafts a really thorough read through. Because they are, I think, at a very mature point, and it's probably not unreasonable. Somewhere soon down the road, you might see a last call being issued. So have a look.
Yeah. And we've got plenty of time. Tis still a month, I think, isn't it, till the actual event? So plenty of time for people to submit further documents, even. Which is always generally as we run up to the deadline for the IETF event, that does prompt some authors to sort of press the send button, which is always a good thing. Okay, well, those were the two topics which I was keen to just spend a few minutes on this week. But I thought I'd open the floor to see, is there anything that anyone wants to bring up? I know, for example, John, we swapped emails over the weekend. It may or may not be appropriate to cover that on the call now. If it is, feel free to jump in. If not, no worries, we can easily move on.
Sure. For those of you on the DNS OARC list, you will have seen this as well, but the DNS abuse, the first DNS abuse SIG, for which Peter and I are co-chairs, along with Jonathan Matowski. We are soliciting comments on a taxonomy that we've created. And I'll paste, in fact, Peter, maybe you can paste the URLs if you have them handy into the chat. We're looking for some good eyes to look at the taxonomy to make sure we've not missed anything obvious, and just to kind of give us a general overview before we start moving on to next phases of that. That was the conversation that Andrew and I had.
Hey, quick question on that. Is that connected with the DNS Abuse Institute? Is that the same taxonomy they're working on?
It is not. It is essentially a follow-on from an ANISA baseline draft that we've been working with. But I know that we've talked about looking at the DNS Institute as well and seeing if we can make it fit. I'm from what I initially think I remember seeing, it overlaps pretty solidly, but we have some additional areas of concern that we were addressing.
And you guys, so one thing I know they specifically don't include, because their sort of essence, I think, was pulled out of ICANN's discussion framework, and so they sort of limited themselves very much into the ICANN, sort of what ICANN traditionally perceives as its mandate, which of course doesn't tread into certain other topic areas. Is yours already have things in there for content related issues, or are you just related to a more narrow scope?
Content like, give me an example. We cover things like phishing as an example, which I would classify as content.
Okay, what about domains dedicated to piracy?
I believe that can be fit into the definition that we have in the taxonomy right now. Peter, keep me honest here. Is that piracy is not one?
I think we have copyright infringement.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I would cover piracy if you want to use fancy words.
There's a lawyer in the SIG, so so yeah, fancy words.
Did you say liar or lawyer? I think you meant the latter, but
Same thing, right?
You know, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But no, I believe yes, we do it. We definitely have copyright in there. So, but then there's slightly that can be sliced up in a couple of different ways as well, which tends to be very long discussions in the taxonomy, which is why we're trying to have everyone look at it and make sure it fits what your expected definitions are, rather than what our angels dancing on the head of a pin definitions have been thus far.
And by the way, the transcript actually transcribed it correctly. But I'll leave you to go back and look to see which were the versions of correct was the transcription for the legal person.
So I'm going to post the link to the taxonomy that we've got for review. And also there is a feedback form that Google form that we have. If you have time, it would be great if people could fill that in for us.
As you're doing that, Mark, I can see you've raised your hand. Is it in connection with this topic, or was it?
Oh, no, I've got the wrong one.
Yes, it's in connection with the topic. So there's a question about what is the scope of the DNS Abuse Institute, and there was some comment about what is ICANN scope. I'm not sure I would say that it's ICANN scope. It's the contracted parties of ICANN's scope, with that distinction being ICANN does, what the community tells it to do. So if you look at the Internet and Jurisdiction DNS Abuse Toolkit, or the voluntary DNS Abuse Framework from, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, that's the scope that the DNS Abuse Institute is looking at. They're trying to be open-minded and expand their thinking in terms of taxonomy, but they really haven't stepped up to say that that spam is DNS abuse, or that what they call content abuse is within their scope. So those things, DNS Abuse Institute, the voluntary framework, and the INJ framework and toolkit, that's all the same scope. They're all working from the same idea and pretty much overlapping participants. Whereas the effort that we're talking about here really starts from ENISA. And so think of it as anything that is abuse of the DNS, by the DNS, can be mitigated by the DNS, can be detected by the DNS. Any sort of abuse in the ENISA cybersecurity taxonomy that could be mapped to the DNS is in this model. And that's what we'd like you to take a look at. Thanks.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to start a flame warrior. My understanding was the DNS AI had explicitly, at this point in time, ruled out copyright infringement as a element of their taxonomy, because ICANN originally has had that ongoing discussion and battle within its ranks of, is it in, is it out, is it somebody else's problem?
Oh, so I guess I wasn't clear. No, you're right. DAI, INJ, and the voluntary framework all disallow copyright, for instance. So you are right. That is their scope.
Okay, thanks.
I have to say, there was some really funny transcriptions there, referring to the Nissan and also Viennese. I thought was particularly.
Well, I liked when the question was, which version is this? I don't know how it was transcribed, but that's not what it sounded like over here.
Yes, it's very hard to not completely lose yourself when you're looking at the hilarity that is the transcription at times. But anyway, and yeah, as Chris has put in the chat, Warren apparently has got a T-shirt with "It's always the DNS," which does remind me a topic for hopefully a future call, but not that far away, will be Peter's efforts to map the many daft things that the DNS has been used for. He called it something slightly better than that, but I think that was the broad thrust of what you tried to kick off on Twitter a few weeks back, Peter.
Yeah, I called it Rule 53 as a reference to Rule 34, if anybody's heard of that. And the rule is that if you can think of it, then someone's done it with DNS. It's not quite true, but it's true enough that I had a bunch of different responses on Twitter and people pointing out all these different things to me, that weird things that we've done, like text adventure games and calculators and a lot of lookup things like finding geolocations and airports and stuff, and yeah, general DNS tunneling and all the different kinds, SSH over DNS and web browsing over DNS and just IP over DNS. There's some interesting DNS abuse techniques as well, like with the command and control tunneling and signaling and beaconing. And yeah, just in general, just crazy stuff. I'm still looking for new things. I'm surprised I didn't find more toys like the calculator and text adventure thing. There's also a class of people who've set up weird host names so that when you do trace routes, like there's the Star Wars intro theme, which I don't think is working anymore, but you do a trace route and then you get the, you know, that famous kind of scrolling text. And someone did the Euro 2021 scores via IPv6 host names, which was quite accurate, actually. I checked it after the final and it was like updated straight away. I don't know if that was dynamic or not, but it's quite cool to see some of the crazy things people have done. So yeah, I'm putting together a little presentation to try and group them together, and it's just a bit of fun, really.
Surely somebody must have done HTTPS over DNS to put through DOE, which was
Yeah.
marvelously recursive, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I didn't think of that. I should actually see if someone's done it yet.
Probably create a black hole or something if that was done.
You know,
Yeah.
Andrew, it's your fault. When that happens, it's now your fault.
That's the corollary, is that if as soon as you think of it, then it becomes true. So as soon as you question whether has this been done with DNS, then immediately someone has done it or is doing it somewhere. So yeah.
Arnaud here, just for my clarification. So Peter, the second link or the last link you sent is the form for feedback, but
yes,
this is the form for feedback on the first switch.ch or switch link on incident mapping.
Oh my God.
Yes.
So the first one, the switch.ch/incident mapping, should take you to the Google sheets, yeah, which shows you the taxonomy and the different categories, the classifications. And then the second one is just wrong. And the actual Google Forms link should take you to the feedback form. Thanks to anyone who's had the time to help us out there.
And there is a time limit for that, or?
Well, we'd like to review. We've had some feedback already, and we'd like to review any further feedback we get at our next monthly meeting, which will be the first Thursday of November. But it'll be an ongoing. We have another weekly meeting coming up between them, or working meeting coming up between them, where we can. Kind of a time limit, but yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Oh, Kurt, that's brilliant. Thank you. I did not know that.
Right. Well, right. So let's draw a line under the sort of feedback. So anyone that can provide feedback through that link, I'm sure that will be gratefully received by the team. I'm pausing slightly because it looks like my laptop's playing up, but I'm hoping this is still working at your end. Does anyone else have any other topics they would be useful to spend some time on this week?
I sort of have one. It's more of a theoretical question than anything. If at some point in the future we were to have ADOT or encryption between recursives and authoritatives, what would the Facebook failure of Monday a week ago have looked like? How much worse or how much better would that have been? And it's more of a thought experiment than anything.
It's a great question, though. Does anyone have a view on that?
Well,
Yeah, my
if-
view is it would have made no difference because without routing, you're just posed.
I sort of disagree because the state that you have to keep in the server to use TCP to get out to a server is bigger than what you have to do by just firing off a UDP packet, and then if it doesn't give a response back, you just don't care. I mean,
To counter that,
if we go above what we have, I mean, with DOQ, which may be also then based on UDP, it might be different, but with TLS, I think could have been worse.
to counter that, though, if we only had a single socket they were pushing everything across, it would have only been one socket state that was in wait mode.
Modern server already share recursion, so I don't think that is an issue.
Okay.
Any other views on that?
Well, I would also, again, like to make sure that the narrative is that fundamentally this was a BGP problem. So when, for all the memes of it's always the DNS or the DNS is remarkably resilient, and it gets this this representation in meme land that it's somewhat fragile when in fact it's quite durable and only as good as the data it's asked to serve in many of these cases. And in cases like this, it's only down because the routing is down. So again, push back anytime somebody wants to say it's always the DNS and that the DNS should have been even more resilient here. Emphasize that it is a fundamental part of the infrastructure that is really quite good, and it's needs to be looked at in the context of the whole system.
So Tail, do we actually need an updated T-shirt for Warren that says actually it's the BGP?
Yeah.
I think it's unless
perhaps.
it's the BGP.
Dan York once put me on the spot to tell him a joke at an ICANN session attended by hundreds of people, and the best I could come up with was BGP. So
I was told it's always the firewall.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it
it just made me think that instead of the Blame Canada song, in this case though, perhaps the answer is Blame Cisco, because Cisco was in fact the ones that were advising people well into the 2000s that DNS UDP packet should be filtered at 512 bytes. So there's maybe some more truth there than we'd like to admit to.
One thing which I gathered over the weekend, it turned out not to be true, is it is apparently not true that the Facebook team were locked out of the server rooms by the now inoperative IoT locks. That apparently is a rumor that turned out to be false, which is a pity because that would have been quite funny.
I don't accept that. I think it was true.
It's true because I want to believe it's true.
Yeah, exactly.
The backhoes want to believe it's true because now it means that angle grinders are the hardware, external hardware of the day.
Well, there were Jason Livingood did tweet about, he had a mental image of Facebook employees with I think it was angle grinders, just with something by the Clash blaring out the speakers as they attacked the doors to get back in to the server rooms. So I think quite a sort of dystopian sort of image that he'd worked up. So I think there was a lot of disappointment when somebody said no, actually I think they just had regular locks on the doors, but who knows.
Depending on how the routing is done, you can usually get in through the floor or the ceiling. Don't ask me how I know.
Right, that's a bit of a diversion, but any other topics from anyone before we finish off this week? I'll take that as possibly not. Well, if I could ask you then, well, two things. Firstly, do please provide input to John and Peter using the appropriate links. I'll put them in also in an email post call as well, just by way of a reminder. And also, if you think of any other questions or general topic areas that would be perhaps helpful to cover off with Google about DOS support in Android, then just drop me an email directly with those and I'll collate those up in anticipation of finding a willing volunteer from the Google team to come onto the call to talk about that some more shortly. But with that in mind, thanks everyone for your time. As always, have a fantastic week, and we'll sort of pick up the conversation same time next week. So have a great week, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Andy.
man.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye. all.
Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.